Well, once there was a farmer. Once there was a farmer who had a field, for farmers have fields, and this man had plants and crops and a house and a family and a wife and 2 children, and he had a field. And one day he was out in that field, and he said to himself, it's time to harvest these yams. So he reached down and took hold of a yam and began to pull it out of the ground, the great earth. But as he did so, the yam spoke and said, "Hey, farmer, what are you doing there? I'm in the ground. I want to stay in the ground. I'm happy down here. Don't pull me out of the ground, farmer." And the farmer said, What? A talking yam? This is crazy. Are you talking? Yes, I'm talking. I want to stay in the ground. Wow, the man was freaked out. He backed up, staggered back. There was a tree nearby. He said, "Okay, yam, I'm going to teach you a lesson." And he reached for a branch of that tree and began to pull on that branch so he could take that branch and thrash that yam in the ground. But as he took hold of that branch, the tree said, "Hey, farmer, leave my branches alone. Leave my branches alone. They are mine. Do I go yanking your arms off? No, don't yank my branches off." And the man looked at the tree. What? Crazy! And he was totally freaked out. He began to run. He ran away from the tree and from his farm and down the road. Well, as he went, soon he came upon a man, a merchant. He had a great deal of cloth upon his head. He was going to the marketplace. And as the farmer came running towards him, the man said, "Hey, farmer, why are you running so fast? What's going on? Is there a lion behind you, or a pack of wolves, or what?" And the farmer said, "Look, you won't believe this, but I was pulling a yam out of the ground, and it began to speak. It told me not to touch it that way, not to pull it out of the ground. And then I reached out for a branch so I could hit that yam and teach it a lesson. But the tree spoke to me and said, 'Unhand me, let go of me, don't take hold of my branches.'" That's what they both said. All things are starting to speak. All things are starting to talk. It's freaking me out. I got to get out of there. There's some kind of spell, so that's why I'm running down this road. The man laughed. He laughed a huge, gigantic laugh, larger than every volume in the Encyclopedia Britannica. And he looked at that man and he said, "That is ridiculous. That's the silliest thing I've ever heard. Things do not talk. You were drunk or sick or just whacked up in the head. Things do not talk. You are crazy." And then the cloth upon the man's head said, "I don't think he's crazy. I think he's quite reasonable. I think things talk all the time." Well, the merchant took the cloth and he threw it off of his head and down to the ground. "Gah!" he said, "that's crazy. Let's run." So they both ran away from the cloth, away from the farm, and down the road. Well, soon they came to a bridge over a river, and there was a man in the river bathing. And they looked at that man and he looked at them. And he said, "Hey, what's going on? Is there a lion behind you or a pack of wild thieves? Why are you running so fast?" And the farmer said, "Well, I was pulling a yam out of the ground when it began to speak. And then I pulled a branch off a tree, or I tried to thrash the yam, and the tree spoke as well, telling me not to touch it that way. And then I ran into this man." "Yes, he ran into me," said the other man, "and he told me his story. And I said it was crazy and just absolutely insane. But then the cloth upon my head said, 'Doesn't sound so crazy to me.' So we've come to you, and well, we're running. That's why we're running away from these things. Things are starting to talk." And the man in the river said, "You two are completely nuts. Bonkers. That's the wildest thing I've ever heard. Things do not speak. Things are not intelligent. They don't have smarts. They don't have will and voices. That's what I say." And the river said, "Well, I have a pretty good voice. What are you all talking about? I think this is good, solid, sane sense. Things do talk. They have will. They have agency. They wish to speak." And the man said, "Gah!" And he leapt out of the river, and they all ran across the bridge and further away down the road. Well, soon they came to the village, and they ran straight to the hut of the king of this particular kingdom. And they ran to his hut, and the guards were there. And they looked at them, and the guards looked at them, and they said, the guards said, "What's going on?" And they said, "Everything's starting to speak. It's crazy, it's crazy." And they jabbered out their story. And they said, "We must speak with the king. There's disturbance in the kingdom. Things are beginning to speak." Well, the guards, somewhat reluctantly and smirking a little, told the king. And the old powerful king came out of his hut, and a servant put his throne, his wooden throne, down there on the ground. And the king sat on that throne, and he was like a boulder filled with wisdom. And he looked at these men who'd come, these three men who'd come. And the king said, "What is this disturbance you are causing in my kingdom? What is this ruckus I hear about? What is this crazy talk you were saying?" And the farmer said, "Your Majesty, you won't believe this, but I was pulling a yam out of the ground, and it began to speak. And then I took a branch, or I tried to take a branch from a tree to thrash the yam, and the tree said, 'Don't grab onto my branches like that.' So I ran away. I ran down the road, and I ran into—" "Me," said the merchant. "He ran into me, and I heard his story. I thought it was crazy. But then the cloth on top of my head said, 'I don't think it's crazy at all.' So the two of us ran down the road, and we came to this man here, and the bather began to speak, and he said, 'Yeah, I saw him coming, and it was nuts. It was insane. I didn't believe their story either, but they told me everything. And then after they told me everything, I said, well, I do think that's crazy. Things do not speak. They don't have voices. But the river around me, in its current, in its waves, said, I think they do have voices. I think they do speak.' So we all were completely scared, frightened, panicked, and we ran down the road to you here. Your Majesty, you have to do something. Objects, things, they're beginning to speak, to talk back. We must do something." And the king said, "This is the craziest story I've ever heard in my life. You three are completely nuts, insane. What you were saying is just jibber-jabber. It makes no sense. It is not true. Now leave me. Go back to what you were doing before I have you all locked up for causing a disturbance in my kingdom." Well, sheepishly, the man who was bathing in the river, and the cloth merchant, and the farmer, all turned from the king and walked away from the village and back down the road. And the king sat there for a moment. He thought about it, these three fellas, these crazy people. And then his wooden throne spoke and said, "Ridiculous. Imagine that. A talking yam." The light of the sun is its speech. The waves of the sea are its voice. The grass is the speech of the ground. The snow and the rain are the voices of the clouds. Far away on a rock, at the edge of an island, the king of the winds listens to the voices of the winds. He gathers them in his hands. He speaks back to them, as you might speak to a horse or to a cat. He listens, and they listen to his speech. And then knowing that the gods wish for a storm to fall down on the distant fields filled with yams and onions and carrots and grasses, the king of the winds speaks a spell into the air, and the rain begins to fall, and the ground hears it, and I hear it, and we hear it listening. For listening is the way into the world. It is by listening that we know our path forward. It is by listening that we hear the continents sliding across this earth. And the whales live by listening, and the dragonflies and the wind and the stones listen to the air and to the fiery heart of the earth, thousands of miles down, burning and speaking, molten in its ancient laughter. So by listening, we go forward. So by listening, we speak. So by listening, we speak.